My name is Isabella Clark, and 3 weeks after burying my father, I found myself in a mahogany-paneled office, staring at the clause in his will that would rip open every secret our family had kept buried. The words looked harmless enough on paper, clinical, precise, written in the language of lawyers who prided themselves on airtight documentation. But the impact was a knife cutting through decades of carefully constructed illusion. Any beneficiary seeking to inherit must undergo a DNA test confirming biological relationship to Richard Clark. Results must be presented to the executor prior to the distribution of assets. That was the sentence. Cold, unyielding. My father's final command from beyond the grave. I had always believed wills were about closure, splitting bank accounts, houses, heirlooms. But my father, Richard Clark, was never a man who valued sentiment over control. He had built Clark Medical Technologies from a basement laboratory into a global empire. He demanded perfection, precision, evidence. And apparently, even in death, he demanded the same from his daughters. I read the sentence again, my pulse thudding in my ears. DNA test. Confirmation. Proof. Across the table, my half-smiling, half-sneering sister Victoria twirled a strand of honey-blonde hair between her fingers, her nails freshly manicured in glossy black. She leaned back in her chair like she was starring in one of her Instagram stories, pretending calm while her sharp eyes betrayed flickers of panic. "Are you kidding me?" she scoffed finally, breaking the silence. "This is insane. Who does that to their own children? Who writes this?" Her voice wavered as she tapped the will, but I could tell she already knew the answer. Our father. The man who valued truth over feelings. Evidence over trust. Peterson, our family lawyer for as long as I could remember, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He had aged with us, lines deepened around his eyes, hair silvered at the temples. But his voice carried the same calm authority it had when we were children listening to him explain trust funds and educational provisions. "Your father was very specific," Peterson said. "The DNA clause was added to his will 5 years ago. It is legally binding." Eleanor, our mother, sat in rigid silence at the far end of the table, pearl earrings catching the light from the brass lamps. Her spine was impossibly straight, as if posture could shield her from the storm gathering around us. She clasped her hands so tightly in her lap that her knuckles blanched. "This is ridiculous," Victoria repeated, louder now. "Everyone knows he wasn't in his right mind near the end. He was paranoid, obsessive. He was operating until 3 weeks before his death," Peterson interrupted smoothly. "His mental competence will not be questioned." Victoria's mouth snapped shut. I forced my breathing into rhythm, though inside, dread coiled tight in my stomach. Father had been exacting, yes. Demanding, distant, sometimes cruel. But paranoia? No, he didn't do paranoia. He did precision. Which meant this clause wasn't born from madness. It was born from knowledge. And the weight of that knowledge pressed heavily against my chest. Because there had always been whispers. Not spoken outright, our mother ensured appearances were flawless, but whispers in the subtle silences at family dinners, in the way father sometimes looked at Victoria like she was a puzzle missing a crucial piece, in the moments he lingered on my features with the same critical gaze he reserved for reviewing surgical techniques. I had buried those suspicions like everyone else. Buried them under years of etiquette and tradition, under museum galas and charity auctions where the Clark family was always front row, smiling for society photographers. But now the grave was opening. "Let's be clear," Peterson said, shuffling papers into neat stacks. "If either of you declines to provide a sample for testing, you will be excluded from inheriting under the will." Victoria's eyes snapped to mine, sharp with accusation. "You're not actually considering going through with this, Are you? This is humiliating. Private family business paraded through some lab like we're specimens. Her words echoed too close to my own fear. I imagined handing over my DNA, reduced to a barcode in a sterile white envelope. My identity distilled into strands of numbers and markers. And then, results. Immutable. Final. Yes, I said finally, my voice quiet but steady. If it's what Father required, then I'll do it. Victoria's face tightened, lips pressed into a line. Of course you would. His perfect little archivist. Always following the rules, always desperate for his approval. Her words landed harder than I wanted to admit. She knew exactly where to strike. But approval wasn't the reason. It was truth. And once the possibility of truth had been spoken aloud, I couldn't turn away. Peterson closed the folder, signaling the meeting's end. I'll provide you both with the necessary documents and contact information for the testing facility. The process is straightforward, a cheek swab and blood sample. Results are typically available within 10 business days. 10 business days. 10 days that would stretch like an eternity. We rose from the polished table, our reflections distorted in its gleaming surface. Victoria's heels clicked sharply on the parquet floor as she stormed out, phone already in hand, no doubt preparing the first in a series of carefully curated posts. Mother lingered, her eyes fixed on me with a mixture of anger and something else I couldn't name. Fear, perhaps. You don't have to do this, she said softly, her voice fraying at the edges. Some secrets are better left buried. Her words froze me in place. Because in them, I heard not just fear but admission. She knew. And if she knew, then this wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Father hadn't been unraveling. He had been orchestrating. Outside, Boston streets bustled with their usual indifference, taxis honking, pedestrians rushing, autumn leaves scattering in the wind. But for me, time had shifted. Life had split into before the will and after the will. And standing on the courthouse steps, papers clutched in my hand, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The DNA test wasn't just about inheritance. It was about truth. And truth has teeth. I returned to my apartment that evening, the city skyline glowing cold through floor-to-ceiling windows. I spread the will across my dining table, the same table where Father had once critiqued my graduate thesis with surgical precision, red pen bleeding across pages of careful research. I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink, the liquid catching lamplight as I stared at his signature at the bottom of the page. Strong, decisive, unshaken even in his final months. Why? Why force this? Because he wanted us to know. Because he couldn't say it himself. Because somewhere in the folds of his silence, truth had festered too long. I traced the ink with my fingertip, as if touching his signature could somehow summon his voice. But the only voice that came was Victoria's, echoing bitter in my mind, always desperate for his approval. I wasn't desperate. Not anymore. I was determined. Determined to uncover whatever my father had buried in this will. Determined to confront whatever truths he had forced to the surface. Even if it shattered everything. Especially if it shattered everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps, every rustle of wind like whispers pressing against the glass. When dawn finally broke, pale and indifferent, I pulled out a fresh notebook from my archive supplies. Smooth cream paper, fountain pen ink, tools of my trade. At the top of the first page, I wrote, the Clark family inheritance investigation below it, in neat bullet points, review will in detail. Confirm authenticity of DNA clause. Research potential reasons for clause addition, timelines, events, relationships. Document family history during relevant period. Schedule DNA test. I hesitated, then added a final line, prepare for any result. My handwriting wavered slightly on the last word. Because no matter how clinical I tried to make it, the truth wasn't just a research project. It was my life. And now, my life was about to be tested. Literally. The official summons to the DNA facility arrived by courier that afternoon, sealed in Peterson's neat legal stationery. The address, the appointment time, the instructions, all laid out with the same precision my father had demanded of his surgeons. It felt like a trial. And in a way, it was. A trial where evidence would speak louder than bloodlines. And I, Isabella Clark, archivist, daughter, heir, or imposter, was about to step into the witness stand of my own identity. The morning of my scheduled DNA appointment arrived draped in a rainstorm. Boston was gray, slick, unforgiving. I watched rivulets of water streak down the glass of my apartment windows and thought about how storms had always unsettled my father. He once told me that weather mirrored the human body. When pressure shifts, systems destabilize. I didn't realize until that morning how right he was. Because even before I set foot in the sterile white facility, pressure was already destabilizing everything. The pressure at home mother arrived unannounced, as she always did when she wanted control. The doorman buzzed me without warning, and before I could object, Eleanor swept into my apartment in a haze of expensive perfume and barely concealed agitation. She hadn't aged the way other women did. Where wrinkles would have etched themselves on anyone else, she carried smooth, porcelain skin taut with defiance. She wore a cream cashmere coat, pearls at her throat, gloves she peeled off with deliberate grace. But her eyes betrayed her. Red at the rims, unrest beneath the surface. "You don't have to go through with this," she said, dispensing with greetings as she set her umbrella against the doorframe. "You can simply refuse." I closed the notebook I had been writing in, pages filled with timelines, questions, fragments of research, and looked at her. "If I refuse, I forfeit everything. You know that." Her lips pressed tight. "Money isn't everything." I almost laughed. The Clark family empire was built on the premise that money was not just everything, it was the only thing that mattered. Reputation, legacy, wealth, those were our holy trinity. And mother had been its most devout disciple. "You're not worried about the money," I said softly. "You're worried about the truth." Her breath caught, just for a moment. Barely noticeable, but I knew her well enough to see the tremor. "Some truths destroy families," she whispered. "Some truths you cannot put back once you let them out." "Then why would father demand this test?" I pressed. Her jaw tightened. She moved toward the window, staring out at the city as rain lashed against the glass. "Because your father was a cruel man," she said finally. "Cruel, exacting, unforgiving. He wanted control, even in death. He wanted to punish me." The words landed like glass shattering. Punish her. So this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Victoria. This was about something between my parents, something festering, something unspoken. "Is that why you don't want me to take the test?" I asked. "Because you already know what it will reveal." She didn't turn, didn't speak. The silence was louder than any confession. When she finally faced me, her expression was composed again, armor back in place. "Just remember, Isabella, the truth may not set you free. It may chain you to consequences you cannot bear." She left as suddenly as she had arrived, the echo of her heels fading down the corridor. And in her wake, the storm inside me grew louder. Victoria's war if mother's weapons were silence and suggestion, Victoria's were far sharper and far more public. The first post appeared 2 days later on her Instagram story. A filtered black and white selfie, mascara smudged artfully beneath her eyes, captioned, "Imagine grieving your father and being forced into humiliating tests by greedy relatives. Pray for me." I stared at it on my phone, bile rising in my throat. I could already hear the chorus of her followers flooding her comments with sympathy, validation, outrage. Victoria thrived on drama, and this was the perfect storm for her. The second post came the next morning, a photo of her and our mother, arms linked, both wearing solemn expressions in the Clark family library. The caption, "When loyalty is tested, only love remains." The comments exploded. Heart emojis. "Stay strong, Queen." Accusations against me, though my name wasn't mentioned. And then, the third post, a pointed dagger. A boomerang video of her swabbing her cheek at what was clearly the DNA facility. She stuck out her tongue playfully, rolling her eyes at the camera. Caption, "When your own blood questions if you're blood." #family betrayal. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. Friends texted asking what was going on. Colleagues whispered behind closed doors at the university archive where I worked. And I knew, with icy certainty, that this was only the beginning. Victoria wasn't just resisting the test. She was turning it into a spectacle. And I was the villain of her spectacle. The letters that night, unable to focus, I opened Father's leather-bound briefcase, the one Peterson had delivered with the will. Inside were financial ledgers, contracts, and beneath them, an envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. My heart lurched. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single page. Not legal jargon. Not financial instructions. Just one sentence, written in his precise, slanted script. Truth will protect you, Isabella. Lies will devour her. Huh. I didn't need him to name her. I knew. Victoria. The words seared into me, equal parts reassurance and warning. Truth would protect me, but what would it do to her? And why had he left this for me alone? Doubts the following days blurred into restless nights and anxious mornings. The storm outside passed, but inside, the pressure built. At the archive, I found myself staring at documents without seeing them, my mind wandering to timelines, possibilities. When had father added the clause? 5 years ago. What had happened then? Victoria would have been 21. Still living in New York, still dabbling in failed business ventures father had bankrolled out of obligation rather than pride. Meh! I had been knee-deep in my doctoral research, barely surfacing for air. What had driven him, in that specific year, to put such a clause into writing? My suspicions grew teeth. The whispered doubts about Victoria's paternity, father's lingering stares, mother's evasions, it all began to weave itself into a pattern. A terrible, undeniable pattern. And yet, what if the truth wasn't what I thought? What if it wasn't about Victoria at all? The thought slithered into my mind in the early hours of one sleepless night, and it refused to leave. What if the test revealed I wasn't his daughter? The possibility hollowed me. I thought about the letter, his words, truth will protect you. Would he have written that if I weren't his? Or was it the kind of cruel riddle he relished, a final puzzle to torment us with? For the first time, my confidence cracked. What if my entire life, my identity, my place in this family, was a lie? The call Peterson called the next morning. His voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the weight behind it. Both of you must have your samples collected by the end of this week, he said. The facility cannot process partial submissions indefinitely. If either of you fails to comply, inheritance will be forfeited. Victoria had already gone, of course, turning her compliance into performance. That left me. I agreed to the appointment. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with another notification. Another post from Victoria. This one wasn't subtle. A close-up of her wrist, delicate gold bracelet gleaming against pale skin. The caption read, "Blood doesn't lie. But some sisters do." The comments tore at me. Strangers debating my legitimacy, dissecting our family like vultures picking at bones. And I realized, this wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't even about father's will. This was war. And war, I knew, had casualties. The day I gave my DNA sample, the sterile walls of the facility closed in around me like the chambers of a vault. A cotton swab, a vial of blood, a signature on a clipboard. That was all it took to distill my identity into data points, waiting to be analyzed by strangers in white coats. When the nurse sealed the envelope, I felt as though she had sealed a coffin. Not of a person, but of illusion. Whatever we thought we were as a family was now buried in that packet, waiting to be exhumed by science. The results would take 10 business days. 10 days that stretched ahead like a chasm. 10 days I couldn't spend pacing my apartment, suffocating in silence while Victoria weaponized her social media and mother sharpened her secrets into daggers. So I did what I knew best. I began to investigate. The timeline I started with the year father added the DNA clause, 5 years ago. I combed through old newspapers, company press releases, even society pages. Clark Medical Technologies had announced a new merger that year, securing its dominance in the biotech industry. Father had been everywhere: speeches, interviews, charity galas. Victoria, by contrast, had been unraveling in New York. Articles hinted at a failed fashion line she launched with investor money that evaporated overnight. Whispers of parties, debts, scandals that father quietly erased with his checkbook. I printed the clippings, spread them across my dining table, and traced connections with my pen. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than public records. I needed the truth buried in the shadows of our own history. The archive, our family archive, was housed in the east wing of the Boston estate, mahogany shelves, leather-bound ledgers, and a climate-controlled room where generations of Clarks had catalogued their existence. Few entered it willingly. Father had always joked that it was my kingdom, since I alone had inherited his obsession with order and preservation. Returning there now, I felt both at home and unwelcome. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Dust lingered faintly in the air, disturbed only by my footsteps. Mother rarely came into the archives, preferring her drawing rooms and garden terraces. Which meant this space was mine, and mine alone, to search. I began with father's journals. He was a meticulous man, And though he never wrote about feelings, he documented everything else: appointments, experiments, business decisions. His handwriting was uniform, sharp, like incisions across the page. In an entry from the year the clause was added, one line stood out. September 14th, petitioned Peterson to amend estate documents. Cannot leave legacy vulnerable to deception. Deception. The word burned on the page. Who was the deceiver? The photograph deeper in the archives, tucked between ledgers, I found a box labeled simply, personal. Inside, yellowing photographs curled at the edges. Family vacations, holiday dinners, mother in gowns beside father at galas. And then one that didn't fit. A photograph of mother in her 20s, before Victoria was born. She stood beside a man I didn't recognize, dark hair, intense eyes, a smile that was too familiar. He wasn't father. The back of the photo bore a date. 26 years ago. 9 months before Victoria's birth. My hands trembled as I held it closer. The resemblance was there, faint but undeniable. Victoria's smile. Victoria's eyes. Not father's. Someone else's. I pressed the photo flat against the table, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Could this be him? The ghost father had never spoken of, the reason for his clause. Margaret's slip. I wasn't the only one who knew the estate's rhythms. Margaret, the housekeeper who had been with us since childhood, had seen more than any of us ever admitted. She had been my silent ally once, sneaking me cookies when father's rules forbade sugar, stitching my dresses when mother couldn't be bothered. I found her polishing silver in the dining hall, her hands still steady despite her years. Margaret, I said softly, holding out the photograph. Do you know who this is? Her eyes flicked to the image, then away too quickly. The cloth stilled in her hand. I wouldn't know, Miss Isabella. But her voice betrayed her. Quicker, sharper than usual. You do, I pressed. Please, tell me. She hesitated, her lips tightening. Then she whispered, some truths are not mine to tell. Then whose are they? She looked at me with a sorrow I couldn't place. Your mother's. Mother's walls. I confronted her that evening. She was seated at her vanity, brushing her hair, the mirror reflecting both of us, her composed, me unraveling. Who is he? I demanded, dropping the photograph on the polished wood. For a fraction of a second, her hand froze mid-brush. Then she set it down carefully, as though nothing had happened. Where did you find this? In the archives. Answer me, mother. Who is he? Her eyes met mine in the mirror. Cold, unreadable. No one of importance. He looks like her. Like Victoria. She turned then, the mask slipping for just an instant. Stop digging, Isabella. You'll only hurt yourself. Father knew, I said, my voice shaking. That's why he put the clause in. He knew she wasn't his. The air between us thickened, suffocating. Her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. She simply rose, swept past me, and left the room, leaving the photograph face down on the vanity. Her silence was the loudest answer of all. The confirmation. I returned to the archives with renewed desperation. If mother wouldn't speak, the papers would. In a locked cabinet, I found hospital records, birth certificates, medical files, blood type charts. My hands shook as I flipped through them. And then I saw it. Victoria's blood type. It didn't match father's. Couldn't. Not by any genetic possibility. The evidence was clinical. Undeniable. She wasn't his. The spiral. I sat there for hours, the records spread around me like a crime scene. My mind raced through years of moments, the way father's eyes lingered on Victoria with doubt, the way he avoided affection, the way mother always tightened whenever paternity jokes surfaced at parties. It all made sense now. And yet, the sense didn't bring peace. It brought chaos. Because now I had proof. Proof that could shatter Victoria. Proof that could devastate mother. Proof that father had orchestrated this entire nightmare to ensure the truth surfaced, even if it burned us alive. But should I use it? Should I let the DNA results reveal what I now knew? Or should I bury it again, as mother had begged? The question gnawed at me as the days ticked closer to the results. And in the silence of the archive, surrounded by ledgers of the dead and the damned, I realized the truth was no longer a choice. It was a countdown. And time was running out. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning. A plain, unmarked packet slipped into my mailbox, the kind of envelope that could just as easily contain junk mail or medical bills. But my name was typed on the label in cold, clinical print, Isabella Clark. DNA verification results enclosed. Confidential. My hands shook so violently I nearly tore the paper before I could even open it. I stood in the hallway, keys dangling from my wrist, heart thundering against my ribs as if it wanted out. 10 days of waiting had led to this moment. 10 days of sleepless nights, of combing through archives, of Mother's stone-faced evasions and Victoria's veiled barbs on social media. 10 days of wondering whether the man we buried under granite had been my father at all. I couldn't open it there. Not with Mrs. Abernathy watering her geraniums across the hall and watching with hawk-like curiosity. I bolted inside, locked the door, and slid down against it, the envelope clutched to my chest. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Because opening it would change everything. The truth on paper. I tore it open. The papers slipped out, clinical, precise, devoid of emotion. Charts, percentages, probabilities. But the words screamed at me, paternity, not consistent with Richard Clark. The air left my lungs in a rush. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't see. The room tilted and blurred until I forced my eyes to steady on the second page. Cross-comparisons with family markers confirmed what the archives had already whispered. Richard Clark was not my biological father. I read it once, twice, 10 times, as if repetition could dull the blade slicing through my chest. But there was more. A second section. Sibling analysis, Isabella Clark and Victoria Clark, no full sibling relationship indicated. High probability of half-sibling relationship. My vision darkened around the edges. Not only was I not father's daughter, Victoria wasn't fully my sister. The ground had opened beneath me, and I was falling. The gathering. I wasn't given the luxury of falling alone. Within an hour of receiving the results, Peterson's office called. My presence was requested immediately. Family matter, his assistant said, her voice clipped and formal. I knew what it meant. The results had been delivered to them as well. The storm was no longer mine alone. It was about to consume us all. The conference room was the same as before, mahogany table, polished brass fixtures, the faint scent of lemon polish. Mother sat at the head, immaculate as always in a pale grey suit, her pearls gleaming like armor. Victoria lounged in her chair, scrolling her phone, though the tightness in her jaw betrayed her composure. Peterson stood at the end, his file open before him. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he began. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked to me with something like pity. "The results of the DNA analysis have arrived, and it is my duty to disclose them to all parties." Mother folded her hands. "Get on with it, William." Peterson cleared his throat. "The results confirm that Isabella Clark is not the biological daughter of Richard Clark." Silence crashed down. Mother's face remained perfectly composed. Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the polished wood. I sat frozen, my palms pressed flat against the table to keep myself steady. Peterson continued, "Further analysis indicates that Isabella and Victoria Clark do not share both parents. The markers strongly suggest they are half-sisters, not full siblings." Victoria's eyes snapped to me, wide and horrified. "What?" The word cracked like glass. "The explosion, that's ridiculous," Victoria spat, pushing back from the table. "Some kind of lab mistake." "Daddy wouldn't have, Victoria," Peterson interrupted gently. "There is no mistake. The test was conducted with the highest protocols. The data is conclusive." Her hands trembled as she pointed at me. "She must have tampered with it. She's always been jealous, always trying to prove she belongs. She did this to steal everything." I flinched, but before I could respond, Mother's voice sliced through the air. "Enough." It was sharp, cold, final. Victoria froze, her chest heaving. Mother rose slowly, smoothing the front of her suit. Her composure was terrifying, the calm of a general surveying a battlefield. "I warned you, Isabella," she said softly. "I told you not to dig." My throat tightened. "You knew. All these years, you knew." Her eyes met mine, unblinking. "Of course I knew." Victoria's voice wavered. "Mother, what does he mean?" "That we're not." Mother turned toward her, and for the first time, her mask cracked. "Not much, just enough to show the faintest shadow of guilt. Richard was not your father either, Victoria." The words detonated like bombs. Victoria staggered back, clutching the table as if it could hold her upright. No, that's..." Her voice broke into a sob. "You're lying." "I wish I were." Mother's voice was flat, but her hands twisted against each other, betraying nerves she rarely showed. "Eleanor's breaking point, who?" I demanded. My voice shook with fury, with desperation. "Who is he, Mother? Who fathered us?" Her gaze flicked to Peterson, then back to me. "That is not information you need." "It is exactly the information I need." My fists slammed against the table, the sound echoing off the paneled walls. Do you understand what you've done? You let us live our whole lives under a lie. Mother's calm cracked further. Her chest rose and fell sharply. Do you think Richard would have stayed if he knew? Do you think he would have raised either of you? Victoria sobbed, mascara streaking her cheeks. So we're, what? Bastards? Strays? Enough, Victoria. Mother snapped. Her voice trembled now, raw with something I'd never heard before. Not control. Not pride. Something closer to despair. I did what I had to, she whispered. To keep this family. To protect your futures. To protect mine. The room swayed. Her words wrapped around me like chains, choking me. Protect. She had destroyed us. The denial Victoria shoved the results across the table. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. My followers. My life, it's all built on being a Clark. You can't take that from me. Her voice rose to a scream. I won't let you. Peterson's face was grave. Victoria, the results are what they are. The inheritance structure will change accordingly. The stipulations of the will. Shut up, she screeched. I don't care about the will. I care about my name. Tears blurred her eyes as she turned on me. This is your fault. You did this. You wanted to ruin me. I stared at her, my chest hollow. I wanted the truth. Her laugh was sharp, hysterical. The truth? There is no truth. Just lies and paper and numbers. Daddy loved me. That's all that mattered. Her voice cracked, and she collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her manicured hands. The collapsed mother sank back into her seat as well, her shoulders trembling. For once, she didn't look like the polished society matron. She looked tired. Broken. All these years, I whispered. Was it worth it? She didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. The storm inside me, the room blurred. The walls pressed in. I couldn't breathe. Because in one morning, my identity had been dismantled, my family reduced to rubble. I wasn't a Clark. Victoria wasn't my sister. Father wasn't my father. And mother was the architect of it all. I rose, my chair screeching against the floor. I can't do this. Not here. Not with you. Isabella, Peterson called gently, but I was already at the door. Victoria's sobs echoed behind me. Mother's silence lingered like smoke. I fled into the crisp Boston air, the results clutched in my hand like a blade. The truth had come, and it had shattered everything. The silence after the storm, the days after the confrontation blurred together. Boston moved on as though nothing had happened. Streets crowded with honking taxis, coffee shops filled with students tapping away at laptops, neighbors waving politely as they watered their lawns. But for me, the world had shifted. I drifted through it like a ghost, clutching the weight of papers that had rewritten my life. Every face on the street seemed too solid, too certain of their place, while mine had been stolen overnight. I wasn't Isabella Clark, daughter of Richard Clark. I wasn't Victoria's sister in the way I had always believed. I was no one. Or at least, that's how it felt in those first suffocating days. Mother's silence. Mother didn't call. Not once. No carefully worded messages. No icy demands to return home. No explanations. Just silence. It was almost worse than her words had been in that room. Her silence was abandonment wrapped in pearls and Polish. But sometimes silence says more than words ever could. It said, I have nothing left to give you. It said, you wanted the truth. Live with it. I realized then that Mother hadn't been protecting me all these years. She had been protecting herself. Protecting her image. Protecting the illusion of a family built on a foundation of lies. Victoria's dissent. If Mother withdrew into silence, Victoria did the opposite. Her social media became a battlefield. She ranted in late-night live streams, mascara smeared, slurring her words with too much wine. She posted cryptic captions about betrayal, about snakes in the family, about losing everything. And she made me the villain. She always hated me, she sobbed to thousands of strangers. She ruined my life. She took my father from me. Comments poured in, some vicious, some sympathetic, most feeding the spectacle. For the first time in her charmed, curated life, Victoria had no control over the narrative. And yet, I couldn't even hate her. Because I saw myself in her grief. We were both daughters without fathers, pawns in Mother's elaborate masquerade. Her rage was just another mask for her heartbreak. The questions that haunted me in the sleepless hours of the night, questions gnawed at me. Who was my father? Who was Victoria's? Did he know about me? About us? Was he alive? Did he ever care? Mother had answers locked behind her silence, and I had no key to force them open. But the truth lingered, unanswered, like a shadow on the wall. And maybe, just maybe, chasing every shadow would never heal me. For weeks, I thought healing meant finding every missing piece of the puzzle. I wanted to hunt down my father, demand explanations, trace every broken line of our family tree until it made sense. But slowly, painfully, I realized something. Sometimes the past doesn't deserve all the power we give it. Sometimes healing isn't in digging deeper, it's in letting go. My father had been Richard Clark in all the ways that mattered. He had taught me to ride a bike, kissed my forehead goodnight, and believed in me when no one else did. DNA didn't erase that. And if biology didn't make me his daughter, love surely had. One crisp autumn morning, I went back to the cemetery. The grass was damp with dew, and orange leaves scattered across the stone path. I stood before his grave, Richard Clark, beloved husband and father, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. I laid my hand on the cool marble and whispered, "I know you weren't my father by blood, but you were my father in every way that counted, and I'll carry that forever." Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't the same bitter ones I had shed weeks before. These were softer, because grief and gratitude can exist in the same breath. In the months that followed, the Clark name faded from my lips. I introduced myself simply as Isabella. No grand lineage, no polished facade, just me. And I found something unexpected in that simplicity: freedom. I wasn't bound by the weight of a name, or by the lies mother had woven. I wasn't tethered to Victoria's approval or society's perception. I could choose who my family was. And I did. Friends who stood by me through the chaos became siblings of the heart. Mentors who believed in me became guides where parents had failed. Family wasn't in DNA. It wasn't in wills or wealth or names etched into granite. It was in love, in loyalty, in choice. Victoria disappeared from the spotlight eventually. Her outbursts drove sponsors away, her followers grew weary of the endless drama, and the world moved on to fresher scandals. But sometimes, late at night, I'd see her name flicker in my feed, posting from faraway cities, chasing validation she no longer found at home. I didn't reach out. She didn't either. But somewhere, deep down, I hoped that one day she'd stop running from the truth and start building something new from the ashes, the way I had. Mother remained in her marble house on Beacon Hill, her silence a fortress no one could breach. She hosted fewer parties. Her circle grew smaller. Whispers of scandal followed her like shadows, though she carried herself as though nothing had changed. And maybe that was her punishment, living in the house of cards she had built, knowing it had already collapsed. I didn't hate her anymore, but I didn't forgive her either. I simply let her go. When people ask about my family now, I smile. I tell them the truth, not the polished lie, not the scandalous version. Just the truth as I've come to know it. I tell them my father was a man who raised me with love, even if he didn't share my DNA. I tell them my sister was a girl who lost herself in the mirror of the world's approval. And I tell them my mother was a woman who let fear dictate her life, until it dictated ours too. But most importantly, I tell them that blood doesn't define us. Choices do. Love does. I am not the sum of secrets buried in a will. I am not the absence of DNA on a chart. I am Isabella. And that's enough. So if you've ever felt trapped by the weight of your past, if you've ever questioned your worth because of where you came from, or who your family told you had to be, let my story be your reminder. Your bloodline does not determine your destiny. Your choices do. And sometimes the greatest act of revenge against lies and betrayal is not vengeance at all. It's building a life rooted in truth, no matter how messy, no matter how raw. Because the truth will set you free, even if it shatters you first.